Welcome to this evening of reunion and remembering. We're going to take a sentimental journey, so maybe right from the start I should say, why don't you make yourself comfortable? It's not going to be too long a trip, but you might as, on any trip, you want to be comfortable. So if you want to turn your chairs around, why, we want you to be all set to go. The first thing that you do when you're making plans to go on a journey is to select a good travel agency. Oh, that's an inside joke with some of the people here. But let's consider that our 90th anniversary committee was sort of our travel agency. And they really have prepared a perfectly wonderful itinerary for us. Of course, another thing that you always take into consideration when you're going on a trip, some very important people are our tour guides. And so to start with, I want to introduce some very special tour guides that we've had through the years. However, I'm going to start with one who's operating right now, and two people who are operating right now as our tour guides. And these tour guides, of course, have been our present and our former ministers who've done an excellent job of guiding us through all these years. So, with that, Pastor Mary Halvorson and Pastor Dan Garness, our new husband and wife team, please just stand. Thank you. And before Dan and Mary came on board, we had an interim pastor, and I wonder, is he here? Is Bob Bow here yet? Oh, well, Bob had to perform a wedding this afternoon, but his wife, Liz Bow, is here. So Liz, would you take a bow? And Bob also has some other relatives here, but they're going to be part of the show a little later on. Somebody who is very, very extra special, and we're just delighted he's here tonight because he thought it was so special he came all the way back from California. So our next in line pastor, Verlyn Smith. Okay, and before Verlyn, somebody who doesn't need any introduction because he is among us a lot, and we're so glad. Vince Hawkinson, and Gloria's here too. And Gloria, you're not sitting right next to him, are you? Okay. Gee, I didn't hear that, but it must have been funny. Okay, and before somebody else who it's really special to have here tonight, and they've traveled down from Cook, Minnesota, and it's Pastor James Claypool and his wife, Bertha.
We're together.
You're setting a good example. All right, and of course, somebody that was very precious to all of us was Dr. C.A. Wendell. So I guess we can say representing Dr. Wendell tonight is his grandson, David Wendell Larson, and his wife, Nan. And I think this is probably a good time to tell you that exhibited here in the lounge is the autograph quilt that was presented to Dr. and Mrs. C.A. Wendell in 1917. It has 733 signatures on it, and David and Nan have given it to Grace Lutheran Church. And so it is on exhibit in here, and you will want to see that. Okay, so we've taken care of our guides. I don't think Martha Wendell Auger is here tonight, is she? But she will be here tomorrow, and that's Dr. Lehman Wendell's oldest daughter. So we'll look forward to having her here tomorrow. Okay. Well, you know, with any agency or any company, there has to be a CEO. And it's always nice to have somebody at the airport or at the bus depot to wish us a bon voyage. So here is our president of our church council, Tom Eckarts, who is going to give us a send-off, a bon voyage.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Church Council and the Congregation of Grace, well, on behalf of yourselves, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you this evening and to tell you how pleased and how wonderful it is that you're here this evening. A very special occasion for the people of Grace, and I'm just delighted that you've had the opportunity to come tonight. June asked for me to set the tone for the evening, and the tone that she wanted to establish was sentimental, and I think what she was trying to say is perhaps somewhat fun, somewhat reverent, and somewhat respectful. And that's at least 2 out of the 3 I'll be able to handle tonight. But I do want to share with you that it feels very wonderful to see all of you. During the course of the last week, I've had the opportunity to work on a videotape. And in the course of doing the videotape, I've been able to see the pictures of members throughout the years. And it's a very moving and profound experience, and all I can say is to seize the day, enjoy the company that you're with, and have a wonderful time with each other tonight. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tom. Incidentally, the videotape you referred to is going to be shown tomorrow at the luncheon, so you have that to look forward to. What better way to start our sentimental journey than at the very, very, very beginning? And Joan Christensen, accompanied by Pat Porter, is going to sing a very sentimental song. what better way to start? That was just wonderful. I'm June Peterson Kalin, and I think I share the distinction along with some of the others of you who were baptized, confirmed, and married here at Grace Church. How many others are there here who are in that same category? Doris and Louise. Raise your hand. Anyway, that's how I happen to be here. And it really is great because I do know so many of both the younger people and the older people. In speaking of that, we do have a cross-section of travelers who are members or former members of Grace Church, and they're going to share with us some of their memories. I think we're terribly fortunate here at Grace to have active young people, really young people, middle-aged people, older people. We have a real cross-section. And one of our youngest active members is going to tell us some of the experiences that she's had so far in her young life. So Kate Stillwell, where are you?
Thanks, Jen. My name is Kate Stillwell. I'm 12 years old, and I have been at this church for 12 years since I've been baptized. This church has been around for 90 years. Unfortunately, I've missed 77 of them. But the 13 I've seen have been great and filled with special memories. I've been through 3 pastors, 8 years of school, and a whole lot of fun with good old Kitty. Sunday school has always been a great part of church, but for years I've really wanted to take communion. And now, thanks to Ba, I finally can. The early communion group was a great idea, and the Passover meal that we did was a lot of fun. Having Bob here was great. I got to participate in a lot of things in the service. Bob did things with a dramatic flair. Dan and Mary have also been great. Besides the super music, fun children's sermons, and grace notes, I've gotten to babysit for Anna, Siri, and Peter, 3 great kids. It was a great loss when Margaret left, but we found another good secretary in Barb O'Banion. I've never really gotten to say welcome to you, Aaron and Bryn, so welcome. It's really great to have you. Bible school has always been fun, and this year was no exception. Since I was too old to be in a class, I helped Julie Matson-Ostra with the 2- and 3-year-olds. The kids were great, and Julie had good ideas. What I look forward to most usually is the Christmas Eve service and the Advent dinners. It's always fun to get together with friends and talk, eat, and listen to Kitty's stories. The Christmas Eve service is also fun. Joan, or whoever happens to be playing the piano that night, has great music. The weekly event I look forward to most is coffee hour, or 2 or 3 in my mom's case. Church has changed a lot in the last few years. When I was little, there weren't too many kids my age. Now, there are tons of little kids, which is great. It's so fun to see kids grow up. This summer, I babysat for Annie Gunther for about a month. Even in that month, she changed a lot. Now she's walking. Leah Fakey, who's not here tonight, I don't think, has started to look older in the last few weeks. Her hair used to just stick up way up like that, and it's not sticking up as much anymore. And her face is really looking more grown up. I could go on and on and on, but time is limited, so I'll let the next person make their speech. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. And Kate is modeling our T-shirt from our church too. Yeah. Thank you a lot, Kate. Oh, here's Bob Bow now. Bob, we introduced Liz, but we didn't introduce you. But now that you've been talked about, there you are. Somebody who's a little farther along on our sentimental journey is Julie Stuthman Anderson. And so she has some words of wisdom.
Well, I don't know if they're wise, but they're words, and you're going to get to hear them. I don't remember my family's first visit to Grace, but in the last 27 years, I've often heard or told the story which I'm going to share with you now. Back in 1966, my parents, sister, and I moved to the Twin Cities from Lafayette, Indiana. New to the Dinkytown neighborhood, my mom got a call one day from the secretary at Grace University Lutheran Church, inviting the new Lutherans in the neighborhood to visit. My mom asked 2 questions. Do you have a nursery? And what time is the service? The church in Indiana didn't have a nursery, and with 2 children under the age of 3, it had been an awfully long time since she'd gotten to listen to a sermon. At Grace on Sunday, my parents were stunned when during his sermon, Pastor Hawkinson spoke out against the Vietnam War from the pulpit. Now remember, they'd arrived in the Twin Cities from Indiana, a fairly conservative state, and they'd both grown up in Nebraska, where box elderbugs are more commonly known as Democrats. Anyway, the big topic of conversation at our house that next week was that sermon, and that minister, and that church. So they went back the next Sunday. And that's why, although I grew up less than a block from a large Lutheran church in Roseville, we trekked our way across to Grace each and every Sunday. The message I got from this story was that Grace is a different kind of church. Sometimes I didn't think this was such a great idea. Nobody else didn't get home from church and dinner until at least 1:30, and that was on a good day. I can't tell you how frustrating it was to hear that we were still at church at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because my father, the money counter, couldn't find 75 cents. More than once, I offered to give him the money so that we could leave, but it didn't work. And it seemed to me that all of the other kids, except me and Debbie, attended St. Rose, a large Catholic church in Roseville. And they'd tell me stories about things that happened in the 3rd grade CCD class. And it dawned on me that everyone in their Sunday school class was in the same grade. And that was quite a contrast from my Sunday school class, which was one of 2 classes for the 10 to 12 children that were attending Grace at that time. And none of the other kids talked about bats flying through their Sunday school classes like we had at Grace. But as I got older, I began to appreciate some of the other things that made Grace different. In a church the size of Grace, I soon realized the value of volunteering. Since every warm body was needed to keep things going, it was pretty difficult to sit back and not get involved. That's another influence that has stayed with me as I grew up at Grace. And while my volunteer activities sometimes get out of control and begin to run my life, I've gained far more than I've given. And all of that talk about the Vietnam War and the other peace and justice issues that came up at Grace and were reinforced by my parents at home gave me a sense of social responsibility that many of my peers didn't have. And that sense of responsibility to live out my faith in daily life is very much a part of who I am today. And I've come to appreciate the community that is Grace. In 27 years of membership, my family and I have come to know many people here at Grace, many of whom are very dear friends. I've always thought of Grace as a very warm, welcoming place, because that's what I've always experienced. Many people here have been part of my happy life events, such as when I married my husband, Tim. And I also know that if there comes a time when I'll need support through a difficult time in my life, I'll also be able to find that here. So I thank you for that and for everything I gained growing up at Grace. Thank you.
Julie, that was absolutely beautiful, and I think you can all see why the future of Grace is in good hands. In fact, I was just thinking, I don't know if we have to come to church to hear a sermon tomorrow. That was a pretty good sermon. Scott Iwan is about to go on a very exciting journey later on in October. But for tonight, Scott is going to share some of his thoughts about Grace Church.
Thank you, June. People were shorter before than me. I was really touched when June asked me to give a few words a couple weeks ago. And I started thinking about all the things that have gone on since I've at least been a member. And I actually thought back to probably the most enlightening, one of the most enlightening moments I had at Grace was actually the first day that I was here. And it was actually back in the late 70s. I wasn't even a member, but I was a student at the University of Minnesota. And another friend of mine, he was sort of looking for a church congregation. And so he kind of got me to go with them, I guess. I get that would be the best point. And so we came in here. I had grown up in actually the very large Lutheran church that most people know as Mount Olivet. I know it as sort of mega church. And there at Mount Olivet, you know, things are pretty, you know, they middle of the road. They're pretty conservative. You know, they don't want to ruffle too many feathers there. Well, getting in here, I will say that Vince Hawkinson on that day, I would say he was on a roll. When he got up there and started talking about one of his favorite subjects to talk against, namely TV evangelists, I was rather refreshed. I thought, this is kind of neat. My other friend who was with me never came back, and he joined a charismatic church, actually. That's a true story. I remember that I actually didn't join until a couple years later. I was still living way off campus, and a couple years later when I came back for graduate school, I remembered that one service that I had been at about 3 years previous. And so then I started coming, and then I think it was because of a Christmas caroling event or something like that. But Pat Porter found out that I could sing tenor, and this was worth your weight in gold, I found out at Grace Lutheran Church. Some Sunday mornings I would go up there and we might have 2 tenors and no basses, so Pat would ask me to sing bass. Well, 2 basses might come later on, and so then I'd go back to tenor. Sometimes I would wonder how I could manage to sing the right part at the right time, but at least they never asked me to sing alto up there. I don't know how well I do. That's right. But one of the other things that I have done on occasion that I enjoy quite a bit is singing the liturgy up there on Sunday, leading the congregation in that. And the one thing maybe I'll leave you with is a little anecdote about just singing the liturgy in general. It used to be when we first started out on the liturgy, there was no real microphones. It was really hard to hold a microphone up there and hold the book at the same time, so you pretty much had to do it, you know, without the use of any sort of amplified sound. But then we got these neat little devices called, you know, these cordless mics. And the cordless mics can get embarrassing at times. And there was one time, and I will not say who this person was, but I was always afraid I would do something like this. But I wasn't even a part of the service that day, and all of a sudden I heard something that sounded like water dripping. And I looked around, and sure enough, one of the 2 people that I knew had a cordless mic on was not there. And then I heard a toilet flush. And I just thought to myself, thank God it wasn't me. And I actually asked around that Sunday, down at coffee hour, I was asking other people. I'm a little more sensitive to that because I'm always afraid that I have my mic on at the wrong time or don't have it on at the right time. No one else seems to have caught on, so maybe the secret is safe with myself and the other person. Maybe they don't even know that it actually happened. But like June said, not only have I gone on a journey here with Grace University Lutheran Church, but I'm also getting married here in this church in about 3 weeks. And so there again, this is going to be another momentous day in my life, and I hope just to continue that life with the church as I have to this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Speaking of music, we do have song sheets, so maybe this would be a good time for everybody to, and we have a lot of former choir members here, so everybody please join in singing whatever Joan and Pat have planned here.
We're going to start by singing number 3. We count funny in this church. What a friend we have in Jesus. There are 2 verses on here, and the one I left out might be one that that person would need that had the cordless mic. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Okay, let's sing the 2 verses that are on here.
Pearl Winters has been one of our very special travelers in the journey that we've taken at Grace Church. And she's had a very busy weekend this weekend. So we're not going to have her speak, but her daughter, Carolyn Winters Folk, is going to say a few words about what it was like growing up in Grace Church.
Hi, this is just so much fun. I did wonder when June asked me what decade I was going to represent, and it really scared me when I realized that I could go back to the 40s. So, and also in reference to the activities of this weekend, I thought for a time that I would concentrate on a biblical passage that has new meaning for me, which is, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, because someday you may have to move them. Little variation there. But anyway, we're pretty well set on the moving business. As I thought about my experiences at Grace, so many things came to mind, and it was very hard to pick out the special ones, or the most special ones. For example, the annual Sunday school picnic by the river, I remember that. We had all the traditional things like gunny sack races, etc. The annual Christmas pageant, where I was always very jealous of the inevitably blonde girl who got to play Mary, because I knew that I was a better actor than whoever that was. I remember years of Sunday school with movable partitions. In case you are wondering, the curtains were a definite upgrade. I remember that. I remember the opening singing with the junior hymnal, and some of the hymns that we see printed remind me so much of those. I remember that our confirmation class, and I see Pastor Claypool here so he can confirm or deny this, our confirmation was delayed from the traditional spring until fall because we weren't ready for the public examination. It was quite a disgrace, I guess. And then, as it turned out, we all got to answer together anyway. We could, speak the parts together rather than individually. And I didn't know that you were going to be here, so I have to add something very special, and that is that I was always extremely impressed with Mrs. Claypool. And I see that she is as lovely as she was then. It's very nice. She was one of those people that I always hoped to become like. But finally, I selected two things which I'd like to just concentrate on and share with you, because I think they're very typical of what I consider Grace Congregation. And the first is as much a story about my mother as it is about Grace. It sort of ties into some of the other things that have been said. And that is that when my husband Gordon was in seminary, the seminary chorus was to sing on Good Friday at Mount Olivet Lutheran Church. So, of course, my parents and I went down there, and we walked through the basement in order to get to the sanctuary. I don't really recall why, but arrayed in the basement were tables full of hundreds of Easter flowers, which we were informed were going to be banked in the front at Easter. Now, anybody who knows my mother knows that her first reaction was this was a terrible waste of money. And she could not get over how they could possibly be spending all that money on those flowers, because there were so many other more worthwhile things to spend them on. Well, anyway, Easter came, and we were sitting in the pew upstairs, and all of a sudden, during the prelude, out of absolutely nowhere, Mother shrugged her shoulders and said, "Well, I'd rather be here at Grace with our 3 Easter lilies." The second thing that I thought that I would mention or reflect on really is not a memory, but rather something that I have thought about in recent years. At some point a few years ago, it occurred to me that Grace perhaps was not a common name for an Augustana Lutheran church that was founded at the time of this church. I don't know if that's true or not, but I certainly don't know many with that name. It has also occurred to me that it is a very appropriate name for this congregation. And I don't know if the name reflected the theology of the founders or if the name has helped to shape the congregation. But certainly the experience of grace has been part of my experience at this church. This church, along with my parents, provided the experiences and the context for my own spiritual formation. And as the years have gone by, it is the experience of God's grace that has been a most significant spiritual value for me. I know that my understanding of grace is what it is because of what I experience and continue to experience here when I worship. This is a community which has always accepted all people and loved them without judgment. This is what makes Grace unique. It is a place where I can be part of a worshiping congregation that includes people with all kinds of limitations, physical limitations. A child I forgot to mention who was part of our Sunday school when I was growing up, who was a Down syndrome child. People who have different sexual orientations, people who are of different races. They even accepted a Norwegian like me. It includes people who have lost their way, and it includes people who are very clearly on their way. And it values every person actively. It is because of this amazing Grace Church that at those times when my own very dimly burning wick of faith flares up and I do see God more clearly, that she is a gracious God.
I think most of us know Pearl, but Pearl, will you stand up too? I think Pearl is another role model for many of us. We are too, Pearl. One of my favorite travelers on his sentimental journey is Bjorn Monson. I know he has some heartfelt memories. Oh.
Well, I didn't write anything down. My high school speech teacher always said that she didn't think I really ever prepared any of my speeches, but just always talked extemporaneously, which was probably true. I showed up in the backyard of Grace in 1964 when I started to go to school at the university. And I lived in a medical fraternity house, which was just on the other side of the block, which unfortunately is now under a huge pile of bricks called Building A. Fortunately, Grace hasn't succumbed as the Phi Rho Sigma house did. But I thought it was pretty handy to have a Lutheran church right around the corner. And I had come off the prairie and out of a great tradition of hellfire and brimstone preaching, and sort of expected to get the same sort of thing when I showed up at Grace, but I found that there were different angles at which to view and use the gospel. As one might say, Vince was frequently on a roll. And this was, of course, in the thick of the struggle over Vietnam and in Vietnam. But another motivation of mine was to see if there might be some nice, eligible young Scandinavian ladies that might be going to church here. But that concern ceased for me when I discovered Margaret hiding behind the swing on her grandmother's front porch. So we were married here in 1967, and not too long after that we were gone from the cities for 3 years. And then I came back and was spending some time at the county hospital downtown Minneapolis, and we resumed our attendance here at Grace, and this was in the early 70s. And the war was pretty much in the past now, but Vince was preaching a lot of social caring and the importance to try and get involved in society and help people with their ills. And we really did try to take this to heart. And one Saturday night we got a telephone call from a desperate man. And he said, "I've been referred to you by Pastor Hawkinson. And I really need someone to talk to badly." And I said, "Well, I'd be more than happy to help." So we agreed to meet, of all places, in the Greyhound bus depot in St. Paul. So I left, and I think Margaret wasn't too happy about it, but I went down to talk to this guy, and I don't remember exactly what his problem was, but eventually it came around to the fact that his problem was basically monetary. And he said he really thought a lot of Pastor Hawkinson, but he was really in a tough spot, and if I could just help him out. And I said, well, you know, we've got a lot of people in our church that care. You ought to come to Grace, and you might meet some people that could help you with some of your other problems. And he said, well, I'd really like to come. And I agreed to pick him up the next morning in front of one of the missions in downtown St. Paul and bring him to church. Needless to say, he didn't show up. But he still had my money, of course. And I'm not sure exactly what Vince had to say when I asked him about this guy, but I think he might have gotten fleeced in a similar manner. Well, things changed for me. I eventually did get done being a trainee and started doing things, and my responsibilities and my relationship to Grace changed a little bit. And you know, one thing as a surgeon, you're not real comfortable taking care of your own family, but lo and behold, one day the official and unofficial greeter at Grace Church, Anders Olsen, showed up in my office, and Anders needed an operation. So Anders at that time was about 86 years old, and he'd never seen the inside of a hospital before. But he had an aneurysm, and it needed to be removed, and so I agreed to do it, and needless to say, it was a tense time, not only for Anders, but for me. But fortunately, it all turned out well, and Anders gradually got over it. And one Sunday morning at coffee hour, I was talking to Otto Freiberg, and he was wondering how Anders was getting along. And I said, well, he's doing pretty well. It's a big aneurysm and a tough recovery. And he said, yeah, it's really a shame what happened to that young kid. And I think Otto at that time was he was in the second half of his 90s somewhere. So, well, it's been a great place for us to go to church. I think it's expanded our horizons as far as our interpretation of the gospel and life, and it's an eclectic mixture of people here, which has always been a comfortable place for us to be. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. This next group of people are very, very sentimental about church. They've been on the road on this journey for a long, long time, but they certainly are not weary. But I think while they're coming up here, I think we will sing another song. So will these good people start coming up? Marilyn Belgum and Ellis Benson are still members here at Grace. And I think you've heard us speak of the Pearson sisters, Annette Pearson and Verna Pearson Thornton, and the Larson sisters, Ruth Larson Lindquist, Esther Larson Stoll, and Martha Larson Johnson are former members of Grace, and I know they're terribly sentimental about our church. I think some of their memories are going to be historical, but I would say mostly hysterical. So do you want to come on up here, and you can each one take your turn, but while you're coming up, let's sing another song, Joan.
Why don't we sing another old favorite, number 4, Rock of Ages.
From
Don't let them stray too far.
What is there about us that we come in bunches? I think there could have been a better choice of song, Rock of Ages.
I was hurt. I was hurt. Verna was hurt and I was hurt. In fact, I don't know that I'm going to go on after that. Really, really hurt, didn't it? No, it is. It's just wonderful to see all your beautiful faces and to be here. And in fact, it's wonderful to be anywhere, isn't it? So I'm one of the oldest living members of Grace Church, and I will just tell you briefly. I'm supposed to speak just about that particular era of 1935, when we moved from Duluth, Minnesota. My mother, Hilda Ingeborg Munson Olson, and my father, Edward Yalmer, and Donald Olson, and me. And we moved here from Duluth and went up to live on Bedford. We had no telephone and no car, and we always walked to Grace Church from there. And it was, I remember coming on Christmas Eve. We'd start out about 10 o'clock at night, and we'd march down here. And you may well ask, why did we not ask for a ride? It was because we were Swedish. And we did not want to put anyone out. We did not want to ask for favors. We did not want people to think we weren't competent. And as my mother said, you do not push yourself forward at all, and you do not think more highly of yourself than you ought. So we always walked. We never asked for help of any kind. So. And I remember coming here, walking along the railroad tracks, and I always prayed a lot, but I had two prayers. I prayed, first of all, that my mother would not die ever, and that I always would have friends. And those two really did come true. Those were wonderful wishes fulfilled. And then I also used to pray that my father would walk on the outside of the sidewalk when we'd walk. Because in those days it was very important for the man to walk on the outside of the sidewalk, and I wanted things to be right. And being a Swedish child, you would never, ever correct a parent or say anything to them like, Dad, could you walk on the outside? But I would have all the trouble of trying to edge over and get my mother to go on the inside so my father would walk on, and he never did. He always walked on the inside. But it was a source of great pain to me during those years. And yes, because it isn't like the young people today who sometimes speak up. But we came here, and I have to say, Mrs. Swensen and Anders Olson probably literally changed my entire life, because it was because of their wonderful friendship, and also some of the other older people, Pearl and others, who made my mother, who was a very shy person, feel welcome. And I have to say, I just have to say it, that I just had the most wonderful mother in the world, and a lot of you older people remember her. And we always bartered a little bit. The reason I'm wearing this dress is that she knit this dress about 50 years ago, and we would always have a little deal. She never wanted to speak in church because she was so shy, or read the minutes of the meeting of the Sharon Ladies' Aid. So she said, I'll sew or knit for you if you write out things for me to do. And so that she'd be able to speak on. And so that's how we traded a little bit. I think I got the best deal, but. So then I remember also we had no Luther League here at that time, and I decided I would go to Luther League over at Hope Church. However, it did not go exactly for the right reason. I liked a certain boy who went there, David Boxrood, and the only reason I went to Luther League was because of him, and God has punished me severely for that over the years. Because we went to, the only reason I went to the Hope Luther League camp was because of this man, and I always prayed that he would look at me. He never did ever look at me. And I will state, I had one of the most wretched weeks of my entire life at that camp. I just sat up there. I didn't know anybody, and you know, it was one of those times of life that I just prayed it would end. And when we got back to Hope Church at the end of the week, I said to the person who had sponsored the tour and was driving the car, "I'm sorry I met you." I was trying to be, I wanted to say, be real polite because we were Swedish, always say the right thing, and I wanted to say, "I'm glad I met you," but I didn't know about Freud then, and the truth came out. You know. I just have to say a bit about Dr. Wendell, who was absolutely my hero of all of life, and I always wished I could marry a minister, but God in his wisdom knew better, and so... But Dr. Wendell was so wonderful, I have to say, and I just loved the way he talked about big issues of life and about creation, and he never talked against dancing like other ministers did, and you know, I had friends who were always going through this business of you can't dance, you can't do anything, and Dr. Wendell never talked about anything like that, and I always would have danced. If anyone had asked me, I would have, but I never did dance, however, but and so it was that time that the pamphlet "Don't Play with Fire" came out. Do you recall that? Many of you older people, was all about dancing, and it said dancing would cause you to mimic the mating call of insects and other animals. And I never really wanted to dance till I read that pamphlet. But I remember the lovely Pearson sisters here, and we had a party here one time, and in the church, it was a mother-daughter banquet, and I won a live chicken, right, which I had to take home, and we had to put on the back porch. But I think I have covered some of the, I'm just supposed to stay to that era. I could say so much about being married here and confirmed and all the rest, but I have to stay right in the 1935 era, and 1,000 thanks. And I always remember that words of Albert Schweitzer, that's my favorite poet, you know I live by poetry, who says, "No ray of sunshine is wasted, but the life that it generates needs time to develop, and the sower is not always privileged to experience the harvest." And I think Grace has given me that kind of joy all my life, so 1,000 thanks.
That's not fair. Who could top that? Well, anyway, now you have to settle down, folks. Days of Grace, that's what we seniors are living these days, and we're very, very grateful for every one of them. I go way, way back, you can tell by looking at me, to Sunday school here, and there were we were involved, well, Grace Church, between our home, our school, and Grace Church, that was our life. And we were always involved in activities. And I was in Hildegard Swensen's Sunday school class, and the real high in that for me was that she let me sing the solo on Christmas morning, Christmas program, when Christmas morn is dawning. And for a kid, that's a lot. I'm recalling the Young Women's Christian Missionary Society that we had here. A lot of talented, spirited gals, and we did a lot of good missionary work, but at the end of the season, we made plans for the mother and daughter banquet, which was held at either Shevlin Hall or at the Union over on the campus. And each year we had a skit, quite an involved skit. And one year I recall it was nursery rhymes. And I think, if my memory serves me, that Phoebe Södergren was Little Miss Muffet, and Linnea Karlstrom was the spider, and she was crawling around on her hands and knees with a big black shell over her. But they did it. And then we had a circus, and I still can see Margaret Wendell as the clown with the balloons and all. And then we got into, well, if you folks didn't know the Ophelt girls, why? But we got into their basement and got into their trunks. And we all got rigged up with the old clothes and put on quite a show. And we had been asked by several other churches if we could do our act for them too, and I think at one point we did. But I guess if we'd had an agent, we probably would have had many, many bookings. We had a girls' sextet, Edith Holmberg, Evelyn and Vera Edblom, Agnes Smith, and Annette Nye. And we had quite a few numbers that we had worked up. One in particular was, we were puppets. And now we were grown young ladies, and we stood there, and just one of us has to start to giggle, and that broke it up. And the audience laughed as heartily as we did. Evelyn Edblom hung in there the longest. You agree she might do that? Let me see, what other memories do we have? My recalling these experiences might think that it was all fun and games, but of course we got a wonderful, wonderful foundation of faith. Can I tell this, Annette? She says, they call me Verna Don't, because she's always afraid I'm going to say something. But anyway, okay, thank you, Alice. But anyway, I used to give dialect readings, and I remember one where it was, I don't know how many Scandinavians are left around here, but anyway, I'm so glad I got hold on you, Miss Snurpe. I've been looking for you. I thought you lived on Seven Corner, but they tell me that you moved to the river. But anyway, my girl Berta is going to be confirmerad, and I have to have a dress. Could you fix up Marta's? Maybe rink it a little bit in the middle and cut it out on the top. And then she wants to look pretty, you know. Well, anyway, that's a sample anyway. And last but not least was our wonderful experience of being a part of the music program and that outstanding 60-voice choir directed by Edith Norberg, and we were there all of her years. And it was a very wonderful experience, and we enjoyed much wholesome fellowship and mountaintop experiences that we still remember. I could go on and on, but I'll spare you. My compliments to the committee and the thanks for the work that they have done. I have been so impressed with these young people and at the work they're doing. So not to worry about Grace.
I also was a part of Days at Grace. Just the Days of Grace that Verna just referred to. I will dwell on one memory I have of the children's Christmas program. I was very shy and the baby of the family and of the relation. And my first experience here at coming to Sunday school here, I just had my head hanging down, and I wouldn't speak at all. But somehow the shell was broken. I started giving pieces, and I got some of the very nice pieces. And the outstanding one I had was when I could stand alone and in front of by a illuminated manger and recite "Away in the Manger." And they tell me that is when I started talking and haven't stopped since. So, and speaking of Sunday school, the Sunday school classes were in the pews throughout the church, and in the choir lofts, and in the balconies. That's where the Sunday school classes were. Recent years, when we have visited here at Grace Church, we are pleased with the people and the fine work they are doing here, and preserving our grace. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Martha Larson Johnson, and I remember when I was just a little girl. I don't think I was more than 2, and I said my first piece here at Grace Church, and we got up all by myself, and I was quite proud of myself because I had on, I remember the dress I even had on. In fact, I had my picture taken in it. So when I had a little difficulty with some of my words, but this is the piece that I said. I am a little girl, I don't know what to say, but thank the Heavenly Father for this happy Issy Day. And everyone thought that I said Easter. And another remembrance I have, and this is in regard to Dr. Wendell. I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I happened to have a purse in church and a handkerchief. And I kept opening my purse and taking out the handkerchief and blowing my nose and putting it back and repeating until my mother said I should not do that. But oh, I kept right on. And on this Sunday, the sermon happened to be about Martha and Mary. And as I was being a little bit disciplined, Pastor Wendell leaned over the pulpit and said, "And look at Martha." And I thought he meant me. And so I edged up to my mother and I said, "Does he mean me?" And of course, she would do most anything. She said, "Well, yes." So I took off my coat, and the pews are rather high, and I put my coat over me and tried not to disturb anything more. And after the sermon, there was a little commotion around me because people happened to notice that I had recognized that he thought he was talking to me. So he asked someone what was the commotion during the service, and someone told him this little incident about when he leaned over the pulpit and said, "Look at Martha." And so what I think is so wonderful is that Dr. Wendell came to our home that afternoon and wanted to make it known that he did not mean me. So we have many, many happy times here. And I thank you for inviting us here, and we certainly appreciate all your kindness. Thank you.
You maybe know we're the three Larson girls, Martha and Esther and me. And we're kind of known as the Larson girls. I was going to tell you how we went to Sunday school here, as my dad was organist at that time at Augustana Lutheran Church, and went by streetcar, and we couldn't get there very well, so Mother sent us over here to Grace. So we were attended Sunday school here, and we were confirmed here. And we have a lot of fun memories. But I just want to go back a little bit. Further back than I can remember. Maybe up here there are some of the old Grace Church messengers. I don't know. Are there some up there? Well, my dad, Dr. Joshua Larson, he was the organist up that church in Seven Corners for several years. He was also connected with Minnesota College. And as I was reading these messengers, I thought, every month they would mention Minnesota College. They had meetings over there. And I often wondered, when reading this, how the people got from Seven Corners down to Minnesota College to have some of their meetings and some of their classes, because that was quite a distance. But he was organist up there. He came from New Britain, Connecticut. He went to Yale, and then he was organist in the big Lutheran church in New Britain. And that's where he met my mother, because she sang in the choir. Well, then my dad was called out here to teach at Minnesota College. Well, then Grace Church asked if he could he had to ask for permission if he could be organist at this Lutheran church up in Seven Corners. And it was just a white frame building. I don't remember seeing it even, but I have pictures of it, and I have a good postcard of it. And he was organist there for a couple of years before he went back to New Britain and was married to my mother when they both came here. And Grace Church had a big reception for him. And none of you will remember, but there were many people there, and in some of the messengers it tells the write-up of the wedding, and they're here. And they had this party, and they gave them as a gift a clock. And I still have that clock, and it's on my organ at home. And I think the world of it, because it came from the people of Grace Church way back in 1909. That's when they were married. And so then when they got the new organ, that was quite a big festival for them. They said it was the biggest festival since the laying of the cornerstone up there in Seven Corners. They got an organ, a pipe organ, and that was quite a deal. And they had a nice organ concert, and they said they had a real good turnout. But people had to come from quite a distance to attend that church up in Seven Corners. And it was interesting going through some of these messengers, the people who had advertisements in here. Asplin, and he sold coal and wood. Dr. Seashore, he was a medical doctor in the Andrus building. And N.P. Benson, he was a manager of Meyerowitz Optical, which Benson's is still operating, and they still use the name Benson's, but that's how he started at Meyerowitz. And Mr. Benson and my dad, when they attended school here, lived together over on the campus before they were both married. So it goes way back. And we've always enjoyed coming here to Grace Church when we could, and when we were growing up. And of course, the Pearson girls and the Ehrman girls and a few other groups of gals. And after Ulata, they would kind of walk by our house on the corner of Harvard and Delaware and stop in. And there we would have our, after Eweloct, our coffee. So we had lots of fun with lots of Grace Church memories and with people. And thank you for inviting us. I've enjoyed it a lot. I'm Esther Larson Stoll, and I'm one of the three sisters. And your announcement of Grace Church's 90th anniversary has triggered fond memories and activities which have touched me, especially early in my life. And I hope that as I remember these people with you, it will add to the joy of your anniversary. First of all, I want to remember Dr. and Mrs. Wendell and their two children, Thea, Linda, and Margaret. He was my confirmation pastor, and I was confirmed May 27th in 1928. The N.P. Bensons and their two boys, Hubert and John. John was in my confirmation class, and John was best man at our wedding over 50 years ago. The Swanseans and their families. Dr. and Mrs. Stromberg, he was a professor at the university. The Werners, which was a very musical family, and their three girls, Blenda, Ruby, and Ebba. And Ruby was in my confirmation class. The Altman family, the Ackerson family, and the Ralph Ingman families, and Boyd and Irene and Eunice, and the Charles Ingman family, Lenore and Charlene and their twin boys, and Dr. George Stevenson and their two unruly boys. The Bukers and their son Don, and the Dr. Englands with Frederick and Doris, and Dr. Seashores, and Marion and Ruth, and Dr. Seashore brought me into this world. The Johnsons, the Lumberyard Company Johnsons, and their Eleanor and Edith, and their cousins, Linnea and Olga, and Dr. Stenborg, and Helen and Leroy, and I see that Leroy Stenborg is here tonight. The Rancines and their two boys. The Petersons, Margaret, and of course your June Kaylin. The Ermans, the Pearsons, and Vernon and Annette, you just heard from them, and Annette was in my confirmation class. The Grants, Doris and her brother Clyde, and Doris is here this evening. The Alma and Emma Ofelt, the Leonards, and Dr. Lehman Wendell and their two daughters, Alice and Martha. The Dr. Sodergrens with Una, Carl, and Miriam, and Anita, and Phoebe is here this evening. The Asplins, who lived out in St. Louis Park on Texas Avenue, and they lived on a farm. And when our junior missionary band would go out there, we really had a good time because they had cows and pigs and chickens. This is St. Louis Park. The Stromquists, and I especially remember Pauline, the Reverend Gustafsons, who came up here from Spencer, Iowa, and then Sunday school. I remember Ralph Ingman was a superintendent, and my Sunday school teachers were Miss Enroth, Mrs. Eugene Johnson, Miriam Sodergren, Clara Werner, and Aunt Olive. And Luther League was just a wonderful event here. So many of the university students would join with our celebrations, and we would have parties and picnics, and we had Halloween parties, and I especially remember we had basket socials. And my first date was that one of the young men asked to take me home. And after that, why, Luther League was a must. I attended my first funeral at Grace, and I was 8 years old, and it was a funeral for Granny Nelson, and that was the mother of Mrs. N.P. Benson and John and Hubert's grandmother. They lived across the street from us, and Granny Nelson was really grandma to me because I knew no other grandma. But I remember my mother and two other ladies, they sang the song, and accompanied by Mrs. Leonard, they sang, "We shall sleep, but not forever." And I remember that because they practiced several times at our home, so I really remember that. And I also remember the recessional that the organist played when after the funeral, and they played "Going Home." And to this day, when I hear Dvorak's new symphony, I think of Grace Church. Thank God for all the saints of Grace Church, and thank you, God, for Grace Church.
Who else? Anybody else? Okay, thanks. Well, I've got a long one to talk about, but I'm going to abbreviate it, don't worry. Because Esther covered a lot of ground there, didn't she? I mean, boy, some names came back. Nice going. Did you remember all those yourself? You didn't get them out of our archives or something? Okay. I'm really moved by the fact that I'm one of the old-timers here now with the Pearson girls and the Larson sisters. And Pearl is probably older than me, but she's already talked. But how about you, Lucille? I've been looking over the crowd here to see, isn't there anybody who's been here longer than me? You have, Lucille, I'll bet. Can't you come up instead? Well, at any rate, my contact with Grace goes way back because N.P. Benson, who Esther and some others talked about, was my uncle. And so whenever we visited Minneapolis, we'd always come to Grace. And I remember Wendell and all the things here. What a wonderful church it was. N.P. was an immigrant from Sweden. They learned the optical business out in New Haven, and he came here. And I didn't know until now that his outfit was called the Meyerwick Company, because all I remembered was always been the Benson Optical. I think he got rid of Meyerwick real fast. Anyway, he obviously succeeded, and he was a wonderful person. He sang in the choir here. Every time he came out to visit us in Mayville, New York, Dad would have him sing a solo, and he had a nice bass voice, and he'd always sing, "I'm a pilgrim and I'm a stranger." I remember that. He'd sing one verse in Swedish, of course. I understand that N.P. and Anna Nelson, who was also mentioned, were the first couple married in Grace, or Sharon as it was then known as, in 1909. My parents were missionaries in China. My father was a minister. He was N.P.'s younger brother, and we came here probably when I was about 3 or 4 years old, maybe 3 years old, and I was up here in front in Chinese clothes with my brothers and sisters as Exhibit A, you know. I spoke only Chinese at that time. Maybe I should have given a little talk. Anyway, those were great days, and I remember particularly the Larson sisters because I had a crush on Esther, who was a few years older than me. I was 13 years old the last time I came through here, and I don't know whether you knew that, Esther. You probably never even noticed me. Sorry. And then, to my surprise, her son-in-law comes and is our interim pastor, Bob Baum, and Elizabeth. So, and besides that, Lassie and Esther went and became pastor and pastor wife at Mayville, where we were for many years before going back to China. Anyway, so it all sort of fits in. This is the way Grace is. Our lives intertwine. It was just terrific to hear Esther recite all those names. I could just quit mentioning them. That cuts down on my speech quite a bit. And I'm awfully glad I didn't have to follow immediately after Marilyn. I was really shaking here. I thought I'd be the next one. Anyway, Anna Benson, my aunt, Aunt Anna, was had a great interest in music. If you remember, she really took a great interest in the organ, the choir, and everything. And that choir, you know, of Edith Bish or whatever it was, Biss Norberg, was outstanding. They moved from here over to Mount Olivet, I believe, didn't they? Yeah. See, this was the minor league for them. They got promoted up to major. I think you're right. You're right. They went downhill. And I remember then when we came back, we came to Minneapolis in '47 when I started my residency training at the university and at Vets. And we first went to Diamond Lake because we were living out there. But we moved over in St. Anthony Park. Claypools were here, and Claypools were old friends of ours. Bertha, I knew Bertha just about as long as I knew my uncle, in fact, because she was a missionary's offspring too, and Bertha lived in the summertime, lived in the same general area as we did, and I have to tell you that we were in, the playground was right below her house. Remember this, Bertha? And my brother was about her age, Leonard, and Leonard was just terrified by Bertha. We would say, "Hey, here comes Bertha," you know, and Bertha would be trotting down the hill with her arm behind her, you know, and Leonard would just turn white, you know, because if he didn't get out of there fast, she would grab him and push him down and sit on him. And in fact, we used to call her Boom Boom because of that. But and it's just great that she's turned out to be such a gracious, beautiful person. Shows that anything can happen. Anything can happen. Oh boy. Well, those are wonderful days. I'm glad you mentioned Gus Jansson and his son, and Arvid and his wife. And you know, Ed, his wife was our revered Governor Elmer Lee Anderson's daughter. So he always, I understood that he, partly because of that, was lucky that he kind of saved this church from being taken over by the U and all these big monstrosities around here were built. Anyway. Remember, just let me, of course, Anders, no matter, you know, if I'd been very derelict for a long while coming to church, Anders acted just as if he'd, just great, you know, nice to see you, Alice, how are you, and all that. I remember one time I brought a Swedish visitor, a scientist a friend from Lund, Sweden, with me, and he and Anders had a nice talk in Swedish, a nice long talk. And afterwards he told me, my, that's interesting, man. But he speaks the most archaic Swedish I've heard in a long time. So anyway, I'm glad that somebody mentioned Aunt Olive Peterson because she was a real saint. I mean, Kitty, you're the closest to her now amongst our group. And she was just marvelous. And when she died, this church was just jammed. I never saw, you know, it was just, people came everywhere for it because she was so revered. Many of you will remember Aunt Olive, I think. You do, of course, Claypools. We had an interim after the Claypools left, and we weren't lucky enough to get somebody like Bob Moe. We had a succession of ministers, and some of them were of the type that would have appealed to Bjorn's friend. who had charismatic. We had Wilton Bernstrand and a whole lot of others that were really, you know, getting the hellfire raining down on us and making us feel very guilty. So we were glad when we finally were able to get Vince and Gloria. And we didn't know how lucky we were, I don't think, at the time, because Vince was just what we needed, and so was Gloria. And we had a wonderful 30 years. I just mentioned a few more names that Esther forgot or didn't know. These were ones when we were active. We were actually, Ann and I were actually presidents of the young married couple here at one time in the 50s. And it was at a time when the Hungarian uprising came about in '56, you remember. So the church decided to to sponsor a couple of Hungarians. So we put our name in. Well, there's 6 came, you know. They decided they wanted to stick together, and there were 6. Well, they said, they don't want to break up. Can you take 6? Oh, well, I guess we'll take 6. So we had 6 over, and they slept on our sun porch over in St. Anthony Park. And they couldn't speak a word of English. So we had a TV, they watched TV, but the wonderful thing about them was that within a week they had jobs and they were moving out. Grace paid for their apartment. I think they may have paid 1 month. And after that, you recall that, don't you, Jean and Lucille? Yeah. I remember that we had also some German refugees that had come over earlier. I don't remember their names now, but somebody does. But they were very worried about these Hungarians. What? Schalvigs, yeah, they were worried about it. Another one that I remember was Ernest Reguli. I don't think many people remember him. He was superintendent of Sunday school for a while, and he was a great. He had been a minister, a Missouri Synod, was it? Maybe. Anyway, he was very, very earnest about concupiscence. We would hear about concupiscence all the time. Concupiscence, I didn't know what it was. I mean, what's concupiscence? It turned out to be backsliding. We have to watch out. We're always backsliding, you know. Let's see, any others? I remember Paul Edblum, Evelyn Edblum. What? Bill and Joy Ingman, remember them? They were just marvelous people. And Dan Palm was here for a fleeting time and made a big impact. And we went on to St. Olaf, of course. And Bernice and Lowell Hansen, the Stromquists, Betty's relatives, Bernice. And we were all very good friends, and the married couple. We go out for picnics and all that. Grace has been a marvelous place to be. And, you know, it was really moving for me tonight to hear some of these people talking, like Kate and Julie, and particularly Carolyn, who she forgot to mention it, but I was one of her Sunday school teachers. And her little summation, I agree with totally. Just been really fun to be here these years, and I love you all, and I love Grace. Thank you.
Would it be sacrilegious at this time to sing How Great Thou Art?
This is actually an old Swedish folk tune. So, yeah, you want to stand up? Let's everybody stand up. Oh, Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hand hath made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then
I did want to recognize that Phoebe Sodergren Kent is here, and this is her husband, Cliff Kent, from California.
I was here in the 30s. I remember your ex-pastor, Hawkinson, his name? He and I went to that pious Bible school together, Lutheran Bible Institute. Yeah. Well, you said it, I didn't. I also remember when Jim Claypool was did his internship at Messiah Lutheran Church and became an expert in disguise. Do you remember that? You want me to tell him about that? Now I got to tell you. He wanted to go to a movie one night. It was on the old Rialto Theater on Chicago and Lake Street, but he was afraid he'd run into some of his parishioners there. So he put on a mustache. And it became unglued part of it. And a policeman observed this, and he tapped him on the shoulder and said, "What's your game, buddy?" I was assistant Sunday school superintendent here under Walter Ramage. I don't know if you remember Walter Ramage. I had a Sunday school up in the balcony. I also sang in the choir, that great 60-voice choir we had. Boy, what a thrill. I also remember a story about Dr. Wendell. He was riding with Phoebe's dad, Dr. Sodergren, on a train one time, and he was sitting by the window on the side where the other trains would pass. And their train was going about 60 miles an hour, and another train came in the other direction about 60 miles an hour. And after the train went by, he turned to Phoebe's dad and said, "Det var ingen som jag känner." Now, for those of you who aren't Swedish, that means there was nobody I recognized.
And I hadn't seen Phoebe for probably close to 50 years and still recognized her because she hasn't changed very much in 50 years. We've traveled far on our sentimental journey. What did I miss? But would you believe that we are looking ahead? And David Kesey is the engineer of the Long Range Planning Committee, and so we wanted him to have a few words to say tonight too. Where are you, engineer? Here he comes.
Well, I just want to give you a brief report on the activities of our committee. For those of you who are visitors, I should tell you that our committee is charged with determining what this building needs to last another 90 years, how much it's going to cost, and then finding out where the money's going to come from. Really not much of a job if you know somebody with a couple $100,000 burning a hole in their pocket. We've been meeting for the last few months, and one of our first undertakings was to contract with an engineering firm to do a study of the building, its mechanical systems and the structure, and tell us from an engineer's standpoint what was wrong with it and what did it need. Well, that study's been completed in the written report. There are 2 copies sitting on the music stands over there, so you can read all the details in there. I won't bore you with those. I'll give you the short version. In the words of the engineer, this building is a fortress. In the words of someone who is from a congregation concerned with peace and justice, perhaps I should say it's solid as the rock of Gibraltar. But it does have some problems and does need some attention, basically as a result of water going where it's not supposed to go. And a lot of the things that it needs to correct those problems are rather simple and not terribly inexpensive. If we did everything that's in the engineer's report, that's everything, it would cost about $75,000, which really is not a whole lot of money for a building this size and this old. Now that doesn't include some of the other things that we have in mind, but that's just to help it stay structurally sound for another 90 years. As we go forward now, we are going to be looking at some of the changes that might be done with the interior. Partitions down here, for instance, and there's a proposal to refurbish the organ. We're looking at making the building accessible for the disabled. A whole number of things that we'd like to see done or might just dream about having done, but basically things that will ensure that this building can stay here for quite a number of years to come. And I think that's all I'll say for now. I'd invite you visitors from out of town to talk with the members of that committee if you want to find out more of the details about what we've been working on. Besides me, I probably won't remember all the members, but June Kalin's on the committee, Marie Metcalf, Judy Stutman, and Gene Hawkinson, to mention some of the old timers, so you the ones you visitors would know. But Julie Ostro, Steve Wilson, Margaret Pennings, Steve Anderson Herman, right. So if you want to know what we have in mind for this building, talk to us and we'd be happy to fill you in. Thanks.
This has been a night to remember. We're, of course, are looking forward to tomorrow. And so Maureen Stelz, who is the chairman of the 90th Anniversary Committee, is just going to tell you a few of the things so that you're prepared for tomorrow. Maureen, what else do you have?
Well, only a couple things. First, I'd like to take an opportunity to say welcome to all of you. This has been a fun thing to plan, and it's just really exciting for me to see all these faces and to hear all these stories. I've only been at Grace for 13 years, and I really feel after tonight like a much bigger part of this community, and it's been real exciting for me.
Our journey, our sentimental journey has come to an end for this evening, but I think we would like to have a blessing for our journey home. So we've asked Bob Bow to give our final blessing. Thanks, everybody, for coming. It's absolutely wonderful.
Thanks, June. Thank you, Grace Church, and to the committee. I really enjoyed my year with you. It was, it felt like it was just at the right time in the right place. And as the rap song that Jerry and Joan wrote, he kept things just a little above idle, and it was just right. And that's just the way we wanted to do it. If you join hands, at least with your circle of table, and maybe make sure it's inclusive of children and all heights and sizes. Okay, this is the text I want to read. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to rend, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak, and always a time to love. Great Creator, you led Abraham and Sarah out of security into a new adventure of living free and by grace alone. Great Creator, you took Isaac and Rebekah by the hand and led them to a land where they had to rebuild what had been destroyed. By a star, you led the wise ones to find the infant Jesus and the Holy Family. So in this season at Grace Church, guide and keep each and all and every one, that we may be led into joy, into adventure, and into true justice and peace. Amen.